Hey, what's up YouTube? This is the Super Cinephile. This week we're going to discuss some more current events, introduce another fun game, and talk about some movies, so stay tuned. Alright, so this week in current events, there's not too many epic, groundbreaking stories going on, but there's a few that I wanted to highlight and kind of talk about. One that I thought was kind of interesting is that Disney has now greenlit for another one of its rides to be made into a film. You know, before we've seen films such as Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a huge success, and then Haunted Mansion, which was not so good. That might be just be the Eddie Murphy curse working there. But it's actually going to be directed by Jon Favreau, who's a director who I really respect. I really like his work. He does a lot of cool things. And I think he's got a really cool approach to the whole entire craft of directing. For those of you who don't know who Jon Favreau is, he's mostly famous for directing Iron Man. He's got a lot of great, approaches to being a director. One of the things I really like about him is that he's always a fan of practical effects. If it can be done practically, he'll opt to do that over doing something with CG, which, you know, that's really respectful, because there's been, I think, too much of a reliance on CG in the last couple of years, or I guess the last 15 years. There's been a lot of reliance on CG ever since Jurassic Park, anyway. I think he's kind of led a charge in a kind of a renaissance of people actually returning to practical effects, but not just practical effects that look cheap, but practical effects that actually look good. They're done very well. Definitely, we can hope for something to be more along the lines of the first Pirates of the Caribbean for him, rather than having something be like the Haunted Mansion was, which only saw one installment because, let's face it really wasn't that good. Some other exciting news is that they're making a Wizard of Oz movie. It's actually going to be called Dorothy of Oz, and it's going to be done in CG. I've always thought for a long time that that movie should be, or that story should be redone. It's being done in CG, it's being computer animated, essentially. I've been trying to locate who's actually doing it, whether it's like DreamWorks, Pixar, Sony, but I think it might be one of these guys who are kind of off the grid as far as people who you usually look to for great computer animated films. They got a pretty good cast going, so I mean, I don't think that it's going to be too big of a misnomer in this whole entire computer animation world. So as far as casting goes, it looks like Lea Michele is doing the voice of Dorothy. And you might know her from Glee. I think she's the lead girl on Glee. I actually don't watch Glee, but I do recognize her face and I recognize the actress. Also, being the three other characters that join her on her journey, the Scarecrow is being played by Dan Aykroyd, the Tin Man is being played by Kelsey Grammer, and the Cowardly Lion is being played by Jim Belushi. And lastly, this is kind of an interesting new trend that's going on in the industry right now. There's sort of this found footage craze going on. I think it's spurred by films like Paranormal Activity or Cloverfield or something like that, where essentially it's like almost in-camera footage where basically people had lost the footage in a real-life event that occurred and somebody recovered it, and they're showing it for you. Obviously it's completely fictional, but it does create sort of an interesting, realistic appeal to people. So anyway, Roland Emmerich has been planning on making one of these kind of films, which is really interesting because it really deviates from, well, I don't know, it's interesting because I was going to say it deviates from his normal kind of films that he tries to make, which is usually like world destruction, some huge disaster. But if you think about it in the terms of Cloverfield, it's almost the same kind of thing, except for it's like following like one set of characters, one person in the group holding the camera the whole time and leaving it running while they're going through a complete disastrous ordeal. So who knows, it might have worked, but sadly they've actually shut it down. But maybe they'll resurrect it in a few years and it might actually be good. It might actually bring a little bit more authenticity to the films which he's been making, which I don't really think he's made a unique film since Independence Day, really. So this week's game is going to be kind of interesting. It's one that I've just kind of generated with me and my roommate. I have a list of names that I guess are the real actual names of some people we know, celebrities we know today. So anyway, I thought it might be kind of fun if we just kind of look up some of these. Like one for instance would be, and this one's pretty easy just because his name's in his name, but Tom Cruise's actual name, if you were to look this up on IMDb, you'd get Tom Cruise, and it's Thomas Cruise Maypother the Fourth. It's a big freaking long name. I can understand why he shortened it for that, but I mean, he could have been Tom Maypother or Thomas Maypother. It could have worked, but I guess there was certainly a time in the industry when it was more advantageous, when people felt like there was a need to change their name to make it sound better as a screen credit. So anyway, I'm going to give you some names, and feel free to go on to IMDb, type in these names, and just kind of find out who some of these guys are. So one of them, I thought this one was really interesting. This person's name is Mark Sinclair Vincent, and you'll be surprised. And like I was saying before, I think a lot of these names are just fine. He could be Mark Vincent, and people would know him. I don't know of any other famous Mark Vincents out there or anything like that. For whatever reason, they decided that they needed to change their name in order to make it better, in order to stand out more. And I guess it worked for this person. Anyway, have fun checking that one out. Another one to check out is Karen Elaine Johnson. You might be surprised. Some of you might actually even know this if you ever wondered way back in the day, because she's a little bit older of an actress. If one of you ever wondered like what her real name was, you might have actually figured that one out. But that one's Karen Elaine Johnson. Check it out. And the last one I want to do today is Maurice Joseph Micklewhite. It's quite the interesting name as well. I think that one will surprise you too. So anyway, go look those up. Have fun. One more time, let me give them to you. Mark Sinclair Vincent, Karen Elaine Johnson, Maurice Joseph Micklewhite. Look those up on IMDb, and I guess enjoy. So the film we watched last week was Changeling. And, I have to admit, I might seem pretty sycophantic when it comes to Clint Eastwood, but I just love his films. I just think he certainly adds much more substance and heart, and just... You don't ever feel like when you're watching his films that there's anything asinine in there, that there's anything that's not necessary, or just like, why did he even do that? Generally, he's always making a point, and everything contributes to the story, and it's usually making a powerful point at that. And so in this film, essentially, for those of you who watch it, you know that it's about a woman whose son is kidnapped, and the LAPD, in order to save face, they return her son to her son. And it's not her son, obviously. She has complete evidence that it's not her son, and yet they still try to say that like she's crazy, or that certain, it's possible certain physiological changes happened to him, and it was her son, I guess what blew me away was that this is all a true story. I mean, obviously there's certain artistic liberties taken, but I do believe that Clint Eastwood does try to stay pretty true to events as they actually occurred. Just the idea that the police would actually be trying to create a sort of a counter case against her and try to smear her name and say that even though she's saying we didn't do our job, we actually did our job and she's just crazy. I mean, it's just insane. And just how it went throughout the whole entire film, showing the lengths that the LAPD would go to in order to just not be wrong. I mean, I can understand, they're coming from a lot of bad scrutinization from the newspapers, but that's obviously because of their policy. And rather than change their policy, they just try to shut people up, which is something typical that tyrannical governments do, whether it's, at a national level or something on a more localized level, like in a city, a civic level. There was a point in there where, the people of LA noticed that there was a problem. They knew that there needed to be reform and change, and that things needed to be different with the LAPD, and yet they were still tolerating the abuses of the law. What I'm talking about is there's a very interesting portion there where we start to see the different criminals on trial. We see obviously the gross, just disgusting, repulsive murderer on trial. And as far as we can tell, based on what the all-seeing eye of the film lets us know, this guy is clearly guilty, but he still deserves a fair trial. And at the same time, they're trying the police for their misconduct and for their violation of law and rule of law. And yet at the same time, from what we can tell, based on what we're shown by Clint Eastwood and with the film, is that this guy didn't get a fair trial. The murderer, he didn't get a fair trial. And I guess the reason why I thought that was poignant is because I think that actually is quite prevalent today, where we often have people making a big stink about the fact that law enforcement and corruption in the government and things like that yet they end up tolerating the practice that is basically the very thing that they thought that was being done. I mean, and normally people will justify it because they say, well, in the case of the woman who was being tried played by Angelina Jolie, the woman who was going through her ordeal, she was innocent. But obviously this guy was clearly guilty, so, you know, it was okay for her to fight against that and to basically call the police out on the injustices that were done to her. But since the other guy's clearly guilty, it's okay. We can allow for that to happen. But that's not a good way of doing it either, because if it's not good for one, or if it's not good for all, then who's it good for? You can't be selective with who the law applies to. As far as technical aspects go, I definitely saw that this was clearly a Clint Eastwood film. It had that classic Clint Eastwood look, which I really actually like. It's very, you know, contrasty. It's low lighting, but it's also got that very saturated color look. And I can see that the era also lended itself to have a lot of these amazing colors come out just because of the colors and the motifs, and that probably helped contribute to the overall look that just looked nice and crisp and gave it a great look and feel. So I can tell why that was nominated for cinematography. One thing I really like Clint Eastwood's movies for is he has a lot of really good metaphorical imagery, and what I mean by that is he creates a lot of images that kind of reflect how a person feels inside. I thought one of the best examples of this was when she went to the jail to go see the murderer of her son, or the alleged murderer of her son. He sent her a telegram basically saying that he would tell her, confess to her that he murdered her son in person, but he didn't think she'd actually do it. And so she shows up there expecting, you know, to have some closure with this whole entire issue with her son, and he doesn't give it to her. And so she freaks out on him, and he has to be removed from the room so she doesn't, I guess, dare him a new one. But he ends up being the one locked behind the door so that she doesn't come after him. And so she's staring, reaching through the bars, but she can't get out. And it's like a very interesting metaphorical image of the anguish she's feeling. You know, she almost comes to a point where she can have some closure, but that's just out of her grasp. And she's sort of a prisoner of her own desires to want to find out what happened to her son. I know I'm still gushing over Clint Eastwood, but I really like the way he is able to end his films, but in a way that makes you think, but doesn't exactly resolve it to a point where you're like, the ending is completely resolved, and now I can get on with my life. No, he actually leaves it unresolved, and I think it's on purpose because it causes you to think about the issue or the things that he's presented to you, and realize that you can't just, you know, end it and then you're done and then go on with your life. But really these things are important enough that you shouldn't just dismiss them or end your thought about them along with the film, but really to stew over it and to kind of come and form your own opinions after the film is over about whatever issue he's tackling. Changeling was a very powerful film, as only Clint Eastwood could deliver. There's a lot of great imagery, there was a lot of great use of cinematic tools, but mostly there was a great message that one should never give up, whether it was Christine searching for her son or fighting against the LAPD that was very powerful at the time. She was able to have some tenacity and able to at least find a resolution with one thing and a partial resolution with the other. This week's film, we're going to watch Moon. It's an independent film made by Duncan Jones, who was actually, here's an interesting trivia fact, is David Bowie's son. I'm not sure exactly why he has a different last name than David Bowie, but that's the way it worked out. So it was actually an independent film that played at Sundance. I think it premiered at Sundance, because that's generally whenever films show at Sundance, it's a premiere. And I believe it was in '09. It stars Sam Rockwell and as the main character. I believe it's mostly him. It's sort of like, almost like a Castaway type film where the majority of it is just dealing with him. But he does interact with somebody. There's a kind of a Wilson character, but the Wilson character actually exists and has a voice, and it's played by Kevin Spacey. He plays a robot that he interacts with. So essentially what the film is about is a character played by Sam Rockwell is working on the moon, and he's researching, and I believe he's helping mine some resources that they now use on Earth. I guess it's some sort of fuel that they can make. It's a clean energy fuel, but there has to be somebody who can mine it, and it just sort of shows how a person would deal with being 3 years alone on the moon. So it should provide some pretty interesting stuff to talk about, and I look forward to talking with you guys next week.